another episode of Feeding Our Faith with Father Jeff, and we have Eddie and Anna McBride who are going to be helping us make a Guinness Stout Irish beef stew. Now, this is a really good one for when the weather turns colder and you kind of want something hearty. It's also kind of a fun little dish because it has you cooking with parsnips and turnips, which I normally don't cook with. But one of the first things you'll want to do is you'll want to go ahead and get all your vegetables cut. Now, Eddie and Anna were nice enough to help me do some of these things, but to kind of show you all a little bit, because I think everybody's seen a carrot, and everyone, which we actually used about, I guess it was about 5 or 6 carrots, probably.
More than that.
Maybe a little bit more.
Maybe a little bit more?
About a pound, yeah.
Yeah, so about a pound of carrots that we peeled and cut into chunks. And then we did also the same with, we had about 4 to 5 turnips that we peeled those and cut those into chunks as well. And we took 3 white onions and we cut those up into chunks as well. But I wanted to show you all parsnip because most people don't really do much with parsnips. It sort of looks like a very pale, bleached out kind of a carrot. Doesn't taste real good, but it's not too bad. But it's the parsnip itself, you'll find them, I found this one at Albertsons, it's not too hard to get a hold of parsnips. But it's one of these things to which it actually has a little bit of a different texture from carrots. And the stew that we're going to be making, it'll go really well in there with all the carrots and the onions and everything else like that.
You're good at that.
Thanks. I learned from the best. I peeled many an onion and carrot with my parents. But as we're peeling this, sometimes you'll have a little bit of a bad spot in there and you just kind of cut it out. Don't cut your finger, that's not a good thing. And what you'll want to do is you will want to go ahead and, thank you ma'am, you'll want to cut it into chunks, kind of like we have right here. We have a number of chunks, or we cut it into chunks which are about the size of the end of your thumb. But you'll want to go ahead and cut this one into chunks as well. You'll notice you got a really big end here. So a lot of times I found out if you just kind of cut the big end off like that, and you can cut it in half, cut it in half again, and it gets a little bit easier to cut it into chunks that way. Now, one of the things which we're going to be talking about today is actually the sacrament of reconciliation, or confession, or penance, whichever name you have it go by. Now, what I was really kind of curious about, and Eddie and Anna didn't know I was going to ask them this, but I'm going to ask them anyway because I think we'll do fine. Do y'all remember when you did your first confession?
Yes.
Yes.
How was it?
Scary.
Scary? How was yours, Anna?
It was kind of scary, and although you went through it in religion class at school, it still was not the same. You just really didn't know what was going on. One
of the things that you want to do is a lot of recipes you can actually use lamb in an Irish stew, and that'd be a little more Irish, but lamb costs a lot of money. And so if you want to use something which also will make a really good stew but not cost you an arm and a leg, you can actually use either rump roast or chuck roast. I usually get the boneless kind, and you can kind of trim the fat off, which I've done already. And you begin to cut it into cubes, which you're wanting to cut it into cubes about this size. So that's about, what did I say?
Half inch.
About a half inch.
Okay. And so you'll want to go ahead and cut it into cubes. Now, Eddie and Anna, I remember when I made my first confession. Do y'all remember what priest it was with when y'all made your first confession?
I think it was Father Philip at St. Mary's. Father Philip, the pastor at St. Mary's.
Okay. I remember my first one was with Father Gonzo Morales.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Do y'all know Father Gonzo?
Oh, yeah.
We certainly do.
We were at his ordination.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow. He's a bit of a character. But one of these things, which I know a lot of times we get fearful of the sacrament of reconciliation, but the sacrament of reconciliation is seen as being one of the sacraments of healing. And it's along with anointing of the sick, it's seen as that sacrament of healing, which have either of y'all been anointed before? No, Anna.
Many times.
Okay. And it's seen as a sacrament of healing because of the idea that it reunites us with Christ, it reunites us with the community, with the church, where we've strayed away through sin. Now, one of these things is, a lot of times I'll have people say, so where did it come from? Why do we need to go to a priest? That sort of thing. Well, we make you go to a priest because we just like to cause you a hard time and torture you. I'm not serious about that. But I'm just joking, right?
Right.
Okay. No, the idea behind it is that, okay, if we go back in history and we look at where the sacrament of reconciliation came from, originally in the early church, the idea of forgiveness of sins after baptism was unheard of. The idea was you should never do anything wrong after baptism.
And, oh, yeah, we're going to be perfect?
Yeah. Well, Eddie is, isn't he?
Not hardly.
You're putting me on the block.
Okay, I'll let you go. I'll let you go. But the idea was that you should never sin after baptism. Well, we all know how that goes. And so there began to be the idea that one could actually be forgiven of sins once. And so the idea was that you could go to confession once in your life. Now, confession back then was done publicly. I wouldn't want to do it publicly now.
Sackcloth and ashes.
Yeah, kind of sackcloth and ashes. But the whole idea was that it would be done publicly. We would stand in front of the church community. Thank you, sir. And you would tell them, I am, so-and-so, and this is what I've done wrong. And then you would seek forgiveness. Now, your penance was something that would last, not just a couple of Hail Marys and Our Fathers. It would last for sometimes years, sometimes even the rest of your life. So, thank goodness, the sacrament of reconciliation has changed, and it's not that way anymore. Otherwise, I think a lot of us would be in trouble. At least I would be.
No doubt.
Yes.
All right. Now, as I'm doing this, Anna, I was wondering if you might be able to cut me off, say, about a quarter of that butter. So the butter we're using is the Irish Kerrygold butter. Sometimes you can find that at the grocery store, sometimes not. Sometimes you may have to go to Central Market or a little more of a specialty store in order to be able to find it. But as the oil is heating up, what we're going to do here in a second, we've got our flour and pepper and salt that we've made to dredge. And what we'll do is we're going to dredge the beef in there. We're going to cook it in the pan just a little bit. And then we're going to pull it out. And then we're going to start with our veggies here in a second. Although it's not always easy to kind of bare our soul in front of somebody, there is something which is very healing to it.
I have found often, if I'm really troubled, it provides an emotional release and a psychological release, and you feel more whole.
There was this one gentleman that was a real good friend of ours, and he had been in the Navy. And he told us, he said, I can't go in there and say what I've done in the past 6 or 7 years. I said, it's in one ear and out the other, to the priest. And he was just sweating like crazy. He went in and he came back and he said, why didn't you tell me it was that easy? I said, we've been trying to tell you all along.
Well, see, a lot of people come into the sacrament of reconciliation thinking that they're going to tell something to the priest that he's never heard of and that he's going to be shocked or that he's going to think horrible of him. But, I mean, honestly, as Eddie was talking about, it's one of these things to which we're not remembering everything that every person comes in with. It's one of these things, it really does, kind of pass in one ear and out the other. It's not to say we're not listening, we are listening. About like that, which I don't know if you can kind of see that. It's just a real light coating that we'll have on the meat itself. And we're just going to be browning the meat, and then we're going to begin to add in our vegetables. So with that, let's see. Anna, you want to help me dredge the meat and we'll get it in there? All right. We're looking good. Now this Irish beef stew is one of these nice dishes that you can actually make and then let stew for a while. And so it's one of these things which you could actually make it and let it kind of sit and cook slowly, which is actually what we'll be doing. And one of the nice things is this is really good for leftovers. Stews in general would make really nice leftovers. And I'm not a huge leftover person. I like some leftovers, but leftover stew is a really good thing to have. As you're putting it in, you want to kind of give it a stir. And if you look at it down there, you can kind of see the meat is starting to kind of get a little brown around the sides. We're not going to brown it for a huge long time, because the majority of the cooking of the stew will actually take place as we're slow cooking it over the next couple of hours. So you see kind of some of the meat starting to get a nice brown color. And you'll notice that at the bottom, a lot of the butter and the oil that we stuck down there is beginning to kind of thicken up a little bit, and you kind of see it's browning as well. That's going to be used to form the gravy, which we'll be doing here in a little bit. So we're going to let those sit for a little bit and cook.
Whenever I was in I think I was the 7th grade, and my mother and dad were there, and I went up to the priest, and he was having face-to-face, and I just went right along with it, and didn't mind it at all. And I come back, and I never heard my dad brag on anybody, but he said, I couldn't have done that for nothing.
Really?
He said, you're good.
All right. Now we're looking pretty good and brown here.
That's one thing I enjoyed since Vatican II, other face-to-face reconciliations. It's just something about feeling the minister's hands on your head. You know, and shaking hands when you leave, or a hug, or whatever it takes. You know.
And as you can kind of see, I mean, the meat is obviously not cooked all the way, but it's brown around the edges. This is what we're wanting. Ooh, okay, and if you just dump all those onions in there.
No garlic?
No garlic.
Oh, rats. I love garlic.
What are you going to do with this?
If you just stick it right there for me real quick. So what we're doing now is we got these onions in here. We're going to cook the onions just a little bit. We got them, there's a little bit of the oil at the bottom, and also kind of those little bits from the cooked meat with the flour and the pepper and salt on there. So we're just going to kind of cook those for a little bit. The next thing we're going to do, in order for it to be Guinness Stout Irish Beef Stew, is we're going to be putting Guinness in there. Now, if you don't have Guinness at home, I guess you can find it at just about any store. It's not too terribly hard to find. If you can't get a hold of Guinness or beer because you're underage like Eddie, then you can always just do with regular stock, and it'll still. You can easily just grab the prepared beef broth and beef stock that you have in stores. Yes, sir. If you don't mind. Oops. And sometimes you get a little dirty, you get a little flour on you. That's all right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our stock and our beer in there. And then as we introduce the vegetables, so we'll have the carrots, the turnips and the parsnips, and the meat, we're going to put it all back into the pot to begin slow cooking. You'll want to make sure you've got enough liquid in there. So you'll always want to have maybe a little extra stock on hand and maybe an extra Guinness. It doesn't hurt. I got one back here.
For the cook?
For the cook too, if you want. All right, with that, let me give this another stir.
Okay. Ed out.
And
We have a granddaughter who's 25 years old, and she looks like she's just out of high school. She's always guarded.
I'll tell you what, Anna, we'll go ahead and open up that other beer and put it in there. So we put in 2 large containers of beef stock, and we put in, we're putting in 2 Guinness. All right, now we will go ahead and we'll be putting in the meat, the vegetables, and then we are going to begin slow cooking it. There we go, we got the meat in there. And we'll put in the carrots and the parsnips and the turnips. Okay, I'm going to give that a stir. As you kind of see, that's really thick right now, so we're actually going to put in a little bit more beef stock. All right, now this entire mixture we are going to slow cook on about medium to medium low for probably the next several hours. It takes a little while. Thank you, sir. Mm-hmm. And what you can do is just every once in a while you give it a check, kind of see how it's doing. Because you want to cook it until the vegetables are nice and soft and the meat is as well. And then we're going to go and check back on it in a couple hours.
And you don't take the lid off the pot.
And don't take the lid off the pot.